Subscribe to Storylab for more stories. Now let's begin this one. Chapter 1. The Ghost Returns. The satellite phone's shrill ring cut through the Afghan mountain silence like a blade. Brent Bauer crouched behind jagged rocks, his weathered hands steady on his sniper rifle as he scanned the valley below. 3 years of black ops missions had carved deep lines around his steel-gray eyes, but nothing had prepared him for the voice that came through the encrypted line. "Mr. Bauer? This is Dr. Elena Lee from St. Mary's Emergency Room. We're treating your son Frederick for second-degree burns and a fractured radius." The world tilted. Brent's finger eased off the trigger as his son's agonized cries filled the phone. Through the static, Frederick's voice cracked with pain and rage. "Mom's new husband did this to me. He held my arm over the stove when I wouldn't call him father." Brent's jaw clenched as memories flooded back. 3 years ago, he'd returned from a 6-month deployment to find Melody's wedding ring on the kitchen counter and divorce papers on the table. She'd moved in with Wesley Gill within a week, taking 12-year-old Frederick with her. The custody battle had been swift and brutal. Melody's lawyer painted Brent as an unstable soldier who chose war over family. "Sir, are you there?" Dr. Lee's voice seemed distant. Before Brent could respond, his commanding officer Ivan Burnett snatched the phone. The grizzled colonel's face was grim as he listened, then looked at Brent with something approaching sympathy. "Your mission is scrubbed, Bauer. The Stealth Hawk is fueled and ready. Get your son." But as Brent packed his gear, his mind wasn't on rescue. It was on retribution. Wesley Gill had made a fatal mistake. In Brent's world, there were rules even among killers. You never touch a man's child. The debt would be paid in blood. The helicopter blades whipped through mountain air as Brent stared at the photo in his wallet. Frederick's gap-toothed smile from better days. He'd failed as a husband, but he wouldn't fail as a father. Not again. Chapter 2. Ghosts of the Past. The flight back to Colorado gave Brent 18 hours to remember who he used to be. Born into a military family, he'd enlisted at 18 and quickly found his calling in special operations. Melody Crow had been an Army nurse stationed at Fort Carson when they met, beautiful, compassionate, everything his violent world wasn't. Their marriage had been passionate, but fragile. Brent's deployments grew longer and more classified. Melody's letters became shorter, more distant. When Frederick was born, Brent had promised to be different than his own absent father. But promises meant nothing when duty called. Wesley Gill had been Melody's supervisor at the Veterans Hospital where she'd transferred after Brent's last deployment. A smooth-talking administrator with soft hands and a politician smile, Wesley represented everything Brent wasn't: stable, present, safe. When Melody filed for divorce, Wesley had already moved into Brent's house, sleeping in Brent's bed, raising Brent's son. The custody hearing replayed in Brent's memory like a nightmare. Wesley had testified about Frederick's behavioral issues and daddy abandonment syndrome. Melody had wept as she described living in fear of Brent's violent outbursts and PTSD episodes. None of it was true, but truth mattered less than perception in family court. "Mr. Bauer is clearly unstable," Wesley had said, his arm protectively around Melody's shoulders. "Frederick needs a stable father figure, not someone who kills for a living." The judge had awarded Melody primary custody. Brent got supervised visits twice a month and child support payments that funded Wesley's lifestyle. For 3 years, he'd watched his son grow distant and resentful through scheduled video calls and awkward dinners at chain restaurants. Now, as Denver's lights appeared below, Brent felt something cold and familiar settling into his chest. It was the same feeling he'd had before infiltrating enemy compounds: clinical, patient, lethal. Wesley Gill had just declared war on the wrong soldier. St. Mary's Hospital came into view as the helicopter descended. Brent checked his sidearm and adjusted his tactical vest. He was coming home, but not as the broken man who'd left. He was coming as the ghost of Kandahar, the shadow who'd eliminated high-value targets across 3 continents. Wesley Gill was about to learn why they called him that. Chapter 3. The Reckoning Begins. Frederick's hospital room smelled like antiseptic and burned flesh. Brent stood in the doorway, his heart clenching at the sight of his 15-year-old son, When had he gotten so tall? Lying unconscious with bandages covering his left arm and shoulder. The boy's face was swollen, a purple bruise spreading across his jaw. "You can't be here." Melody's voice was sharp with fear and guilt. She sat beside Frederick's bed, her once bright eyes now hollow and aged. 3 years of marriage to Wesley had worn her down, though she tried to hide it with makeup and designer clothes. "I'm his father." Brent's voice was deadly quiet as he approached the bed. "What happened, Melody?" Before she could answer, Wesley Gill entered with 2 cups of coffee, freezing when he saw Brent. The years had been kind to Wesley. His brown hair was perfectly styled, his expensive suit tailored to hide his soft middle. But there was something new in his eyes, something cruel that hadn't been there during the custody hearings. Well, the war hero returns." Wesley's smile was cold as he moved protectively toward Melody. "Shouldn't you be overseas playing soldier?" Brent studied Wesley like he would any target, noting the defensive posture, the way his free hand instinctively moved toward his phone, probably speed-dialing hospital security. "I asked my wife a question." "Ex-wife," Wesley corrected, his confidence growing. "And she doesn't have to answer to you. Frederick had an accident, that's all. Kids his age are clumsy." "Funny thing about accidents," Brent said, moving closer. "In my line of work, we investigate them thoroughly. Burns like these? They're consistent with prolonged contact with a heating element. The pattern suggests restraint was used." Wesley's jaw tightened. "Are you threatening me?" "I don't make threats." Brent's eyes never left Wesley's face. "I make promises. And I promise you this, if you ever touch my son again, I'll show you what 3 years of Black Ops training can do to a soft civilian." "Security," Wesley called, but his voice cracked slightly. 2 guards entered, hands on their radios. Brent recognized the type, retired cops pulling easy hospital duty. They stopped when they saw his tactical gear and the way he carried himself. "Gentlemen," Brent nodded politely. "I'm just visiting my son. I'll be leaving shortly." He turned back to Frederick, brushing a strand of hair from the boy's forehead. "I'm here now, son. Daddy's here." Frederick's eyes fluttered open, focusing with difficulty. "Dad," his voice was barely a whisper. "I'm here. Rest now. Everything's going to be all right." As Brent headed for the door, he paused beside Wesley. When he spoke, his voice was so low only Wesley could hear. "I know where you live. I know where you work. I know your routine, your friends, your weaknesses. The clock starts now." Wesley paled, coffee cups trembling in his hands as Brent walked away. Outside in the parking lot, Brent activated his secure phone and dialed a familiar number. "Hector? It's Brent. I need everything you can find on Wesley Gill. Finances, associates, family, secrets. Everything." Hector Brock had been Brent's intelligence specialist in Afghanistan, a man who could find dirt on anyone. "How deep do you want me to dig?" "All the way to bedrock. I want to know what makes him bleed." As Brent climbed into his rental car, he felt the familiar calm of mission planning settling over him. Wesley thought he'd won by stealing Brent's family and abusing his son. But Wesley had never faced an enemy who planned 3 moves ahead, who turned hunting humans into an art form. The ghost was home, and the hunt had begun. Chapter 4: Intelligence Gathering. Brent rented a modest apartment across town under a false identity, one of several he maintained for situations exactly like this. The next morning, he began his surveillance. Wesley's routine was predictable. Coffee at Starbucks, hospital administration from 8 to 5, gym 3 times a week, drinks with colleagues on Fridays. But it was Wesley's personal life that interested Brent most. Hector's intelligence came in encrypted files over the next 48 hours. Wesley Gill wasn't just Melody's second husband. He was her 4th relationship since the divorce. The pattern was disturbing. Wesley pursued recently divorced women with children, moved in quickly, then gradually isolated them from friends and family. "He's got a type," Hector reported over encrypted video call. "Single mothers, preferably with difficult custody situations." The psychological profile suggests classic predatory behavior. Brent studied Wesley's financial records. His hospital salary couldn't support his lifestyle, the Mercedes, the designer clothes, the expensive apartment. The money was coming from somewhere else. "Keep digging," Brent ordered. Focus on his past relationships. I want names, dates, what happened to the women. What Hector found made Brent's blood run cold. 3 previous stepmothers in as many years, all with sons Frederick's age. Medical records showed a pattern of emergency room visits, always explained as accidents or boys being boys. One woman, Anita Pearson, had tried to file charges but dropped them after Wesley convinced her she was overreacting. The most damning evidence came from Wesley's personal computer, which Hector had accessed through a sophisticated phishing attack. Wesley kept detailed files on each family, financial information, custody agreements, and disturbingly, photos of the children in various states of injury. "This guy's a collector," Hector said grimly. "He gets off on the power, the control. Your ex-wife isn't his first victim, and she won't be his last." Brent's hands clenched as he reviewed the files. Wesley had turned targeting vulnerable families into a system, using his position at the Veterans Hospital to identify recently divorced military wives. He'd perfected his approach over years, becoming a master manipulator who could charm judges and social workers while abusing children behind closed doors. "What's the play?" Hector asked. Brent was quiet for a long moment, his tactical mind processing possibilities. Going to the police would mean exposing classified methods and risking Wesley's escape. The evidence was overwhelming but obtained illegally. Wesley would hire expensive lawyers, claim persecution, and probably disappear before trial. "I need you to do something else," Brent finally said. "Find Anita Pearson and the other mothers. I want to talk to them." "Brent," Hector's voice carried a warning. "Whatever you're planning." Wesley Gill has been hunting military families for years. He thinks we're easy targets because we're deployed, because we're broken by war, because the system favors anyone who isn't us. Brent's voice was ice cold. He's about to learn what happens when a hunter becomes the hunted. Chapter 5. The Network. Anita Pearson lived in a small apartment on the wrong side of Denver, working double shifts as a waitress to support her teenage son Dennis. When Brent showed up at her door in civilian clothes, she was immediately suspicious. "I don't talk to reporters," she said, starting to close the door. "I'm not a reporter. I'm Frederick Bauer's father. Wesley Gill is married to my ex-wife." The door stopped moving. Anita's face went pale, then hardened with familiar anger. "That bastard got another one." Over coffee, Anita told her story. Wesley had pursued her aggressively after her husband died in Iraq, moving in within months and immediately beginning a campaign of psychological manipulation. Dennis, her son, had been Wesley's primary target. Constant criticism, impossible standards, and escalating physical discipline that left no obvious marks. He was smart about it, Anita said, her hands shaking as she lit another cigarette. Never where people could see. Always had excuses ready. Made me feel like I was going crazy, like Dennis was just a difficult kid acting out. The breaking point had come when Dennis was hospitalized with internal bleeding. Wesley claimed the boy had fallen downstairs, but Dennis finally found courage to tell doctors the truth. When Anita tried to press charges, Wesley's lawyer had destroyed her credibility, painting her as an unstable widow making false accusations. He walked away clean, Anita spat. Judge sealed the records, said it would be traumatic for Dennis to testify. Within a month, Wesley was gone, and we were left with nothing but debt and nightmares. Brent found similar stories from Wesley's other victims. Felicia Freeman, whose son Gregory had been Wesley's target for 8 months before she managed to escape with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Cassandra Norton, whose boy Matthew still flinched when adult men raised their voices. By the end of the week, Brent had assembled something unprecedented, a network of military mothers who'd been Wesley's victims, united by rage and a thirst for justice the system had denied them. "What are you proposing?" asked Felicia during their clandestine meeting in an abandoned warehouse. "Wesley thinks he can target our families because we're vulnerable, because we're isolated, because the system protects men like him." Brent's voice carried the authority of command. "But we're not just random victims. We're military families. We know how to plan, how to execute, how to watch each other's backs." Cassandra leaned forward. "You're talking about revenge. I'm talking about justice." Wesley has spent years perfecting his system of abuse. It's time he faced a system designed by people who've actually fought wars. The mothers exchanged glances. They'd all been failed by courts, by social services, by a system that prioritized appearances over protecting children. But here was someone offering something different. Not just revenge, but coordinated, strategic action. "What do you need from us?" Anita asked. Brent smiled grimly. Wesley thinks he knows military families. He's about to discover what happens when we fight back together. Chapter 6. The Trap. Wesley's confidence was his weakness. After 3 years of successful manipulation, he'd grown careless, predictable. Brent exploited every pattern, every routine, every assumption Wesley made about his own superiority. The plan began with Melody. Brent had been watching his ex-wife, noting how Wesley's control had tightened around her like a noose. She was isolated from friends, monitored constantly, and showed signs of the same psychological manipulation Wesley used on the children. It was time to remind Melody who she used to be. Brent intercepted her during one of her rare solo grocery trips, approaching carefully in the parking lot. She startled when she saw him, instinctively looking around for Wesley's surveillance. "I need 5 minutes," Brent said quietly. "Frederick's life depends on it." In his rental car, Brent showed Melody the files Hector had compiled, photos of Wesley's previous victims, medical records of abused children, financial documents showing his predatory pattern. "This is who you married, Melody. This is who's raising our son." Melody's hands shook as she reviewed the evidence. I thought Frederick was just having trouble adjusting." Wesley said boys his age are naturally rebellious. Wesley told Anita Pearson the same thing. And Felicia Freeman. And Cassandra Norton. Brent's voice was gentle but relentless. "He's done this before, and he'll do it again." The psychological control shattered like glass. Melody began crying, deep, wrenching sobs for the woman she'd been before Wesley convinced her she was weak, crazy, unfit to trust her own instincts. "I can't leave him," she finally whispered. "He'll take Frederick. He has connections at the hospital, friends, and social services. He's threatened to have me declared an unfit mother. What if I told you there was another way?" Brent outlined the plan. It was complex, requiring perfect timing and coordination, but it would accomplish something no court could: complete destruction of Wesley's ability to hunt military families ever again. "I need you to act normal for 2 more weeks," Brent explained. "Continue the routine. Don't let Wesley suspect anything." "Can you do that?" Melody wiped her tears and looked at Brent with something he hadn't seen in years, the steel that had made her a combat nurse. "What do you need me to do?" Meanwhile, the network of mothers was moving into position. Felicia Freeman applied for a job at Wesley's hospital using her maiden name, Felicia Clayton, successfully infiltrating his workplace. Cassandra Norton began dating one of Wesley's gym buddies, gaining access to his social circle. Anita Pearson got hired as a waitress at Wesley's favorite restaurant. Each woman became a node in an intelligence network, reporting Wesley's movements, conversations, and contacts. For the first time in years, Wesley was being hunted by people who understood combat operations. The psychological pressure began subtly. Wesley started noticing the same faces in different locations. The waitress who served his table looked familiar. The new nurse in pediatrics seemed to be watching him. His workout partner's girlfriend asked strange questions about his family. Paranoia crept in slowly. Wesley began varying his routine, checking for surveillance, looking over his shoulder. But Brent's network was too sophisticated, too well-trained. Every evasive action Wesley took had been anticipated and countered. "Target is showing stress indicators," Felicia reported during a secure communication. "He's making mistakes, getting sloppy." Brent smiled grimly. "Good. Scared animals make poor decisions. Let's give him something real to worry about." The endgame was about to begin. Chapter 7. The Noose Tightens. Wesley's first real mistake came during a heated argument with Melody about Frederick's attitude problem. Brent's hidden surveillance equipment captured everything: Wesley's threats, his admission of past discipline, and most damning, his casual reference to breaking the boy's spirit like I did the others. But Brent wasn't finished gathering evidence. Using his Black Ops training, he'd infiltrated Wesley's apartment, installing micro cameras and audio devices throughout. What he discovered made his blood boil. Wesley kept trophies, photos of children he'd disciplined, medical reports from emergency room visits, even recorded conversations where he coached the mothers on what to tell doctors. The man was a predator who documented his crimes like a serial killer collecting souvenirs. The psychological pressure campaign escalated. Anita Pearson began appearing at Wesley's restaurant table with increasingly pointed comments. "Excuse me, aren't you Wesley Gill? I think you knew my friend Melody Bauer. Such a tragedy, what happened to her first marriage. Military men can be so unpredictable when they return from war." Felicia Clayton made sure to be assigned to the pediatric wing whenever Wesley visited, commenting loudly about patterns of abuse she'd noticed in her work. It's amazing how some injuries keep happening to the same children, almost like someone is targeting them systematically. Cassandra Norton's boyfriend, Dennis Waters, began sharing stories at the gym about psychos who prey on military wives. Can you imagine? Using a man's service to his country as a weapon against his family? Someone should do something about guys like that. Each encounter was perfectly orchestrated to seem coincidental while delivering maximum psychological impact. Wesley began drinking more, sleeping less, making increasingly paranoid accusations about being watched. The breaking point came when Wesley discovered a photo slipped under his car windshield, a group shot of all his previous victims and their children, with Wesley's face circled in red. On the back, someone had written, "We remember. We're watching. We're waiting." Wesley called in sick to work, barricaded himself in his apartment, and began making frantic phone calls to old contacts in law enforcement. But Brent had anticipated this too. Wesley's phone was tapped, his communications monitored, his every move tracked by satellite surveillance. "He's cracking," Hector reported from his remote monitoring station. Heart rate elevated, sleep patterns disrupted, showing classic signs of persecution complex. One more push should do it. The final push came from an unexpected source, Frederick himself. Brent had been visiting his son regularly during Wesley's psychological breakdown, carefully rebuilding their relationship. Frederick was sharp, observant, and increasingly angry about Wesley's treatment of both him and his mother. "I want to help," Frederick told his father during one hospital visit. "I'm tired of being afraid." "It's too dangerous," Brent replied, but Frederick's expression was pure determination. "I'm not a little kid anymore, Dad. I know what Wesley is. I've been documenting everything, taking photos when he hurts me, recording his threats, keeping a journal. I want him gone." That night, Frederick called 911 from the apartment, reporting that Wesley was threatening to kill both him and his mother. When police arrived, they found Wesley in a paranoid rage, weapons drawn, ranting about military conspiracies and assassination plots. The arrest was spectacular. News crews captured Wesley being dragged away in handcuffs while Melody and Frederick cowered in their apartment, both showing fresh bruises from Wesley's latest discipline session. But this was only the beginning of Wesley's destruction. Chapter 8. Total War. With Wesley in custody, Brent activated the final phase of his plan. The network of mothers had spent weeks preparing for this moment, coordinating with military investigators, federal prosecutors, and victim advocacy groups. Felicia Freeman, now working inside the hospital, accessed Wesley's personnel files and discovered evidence of patient abuse, drug theft, and systematic fraud. Medical records showed Wesley had been stealing prescription painkillers and selling them, using his position to cover up his crimes. Cassandra Norton's boyfriend Dennis Waters revealed that Wesley had been bragging at the gym about his collection of military wives, describing in graphic detail how he selected and groomed his victims. Waters had been wearing a wire during these conversations, documenting Wesley's confessions. Anita Pearson provided financial records showing Wesley's elaborate money laundering scheme, using multiple bank accounts and shell companies to hide the profits from his various criminal enterprises. He hadn't just been abusing children. He'd been running a sophisticated criminal operation. But the most devastating evidence came from Wesley's own documentation. Brent's burglary of Wesley's apartment had yielded hundreds of photos, videos, and audio recordings that Wesley had collected as trophies. The FBI's computer forensics team recovered deleted files going back years, showing a pattern of systematic abuse that spanned multiple states. Wesley's lawyer tried to claim entrapment, arguing that Brent had orchestrated an elaborate frame-up using illegal surveillance and psychological warfare. But the evidence was overwhelming, and Wesley's own recordings proved his guilt beyond any doubt. The media attention was intense. Military Dad's Revenge: How One Father Brought Down a Serial Predator became national news, inspiring other military families to come forward with their own stories of abuse and exploitation. During Wesley's arraignment, Brent sat in the gallery with all of Wesley's previous victims, a silent wall of witnesses to his crimes. Wesley's eyes found Brent's across the courtroom, and for the first time, he seemed to truly understand what he was facing. "Your Honor," the prosecutor began, "Wesley Gill represents a particularly dangerous type of predator, one who specifically targets the families of deployed military personnel, using their service to our country as a weapon against them. The evidence will show a pattern of systematic abuse spanning at least 5 years and involving at least a dozen victims." Wesley's bail was denied. As he was led away in shackles, he looked back at Brent one final time. Brent's expression was coldly satisfied. The hunt was over. The predator was caged. But Brent wasn't finished. Wesley's network had been extensive, involving corrupt officials, complicit medical professionals, and enablers throughout the system. Each one would face consequences. Justice isn't just about punishment, Brent explained to Frederick that evening as they shared dinner for the first time in 3 years. It's about making sure this never happens to another family. Frederick nodded, his arms still in a cast, but his spirit unbroken. "What happens now, Dad?" Brent smiled grimly. "Now we make sure everyone who helped Wesley pays their debt. The ghost doesn't leave loose ends." Chapter 9. Blood Debt Paid. 6 months later, Wesley Gill's criminal empire had been completely dismantled. Federal prosecutors had rolled up his entire network, charging dozens of accomplices with everything from child abuse to racketeering. The corrupt social worker who'd helped Wesley maintain custody of his victims received 10 years. The hospital administrator who'd covered up his drug thefts got 15. The lawyer who'd intimidated abuse victims was disbarred and faced federal obstruction charges. Wesley himself received life without parole on multiple counts of child abuse, drug trafficking, and racketeering. In prison, word had spread about his crimes against military families. Convicts had their own code of justice, and child abusers who targeted soldiers' kids occupied the lowest rung of the prison hierarchy. Brent received reports from contacts inside the federal prison system. Wesley spent 23 hours a day in protective custody, living in constant fear of other inmates. The soft administrator who'd once terrorized children was now the terrorized, jumping at shadows and begging guards for protection. "Poetic justice," Hector observed during one of their encrypted calls. The hunter becomes the hunted. But Brent's most important victory was personal. Frederick had moved back in with him permanently. The custody arrangement quietly reversed when Melody voluntarily relinquished her rights. She'd entered therapy to deal with her trauma and was slowly rebuilding her life, but she understood that Frederick needed his father now. "I'm sorry," she told Brent during one of their few conversations. "I was so afraid of losing him that I put him in danger. I'll never forgive myself." Brent hadn't forgiven her either, but he'd found something more valuable than forgiveness: indifference. Melody was no longer his wife, no longer his concern. She was simply Frederick's mother, nothing more. The network of military mothers had evolved into something unprecedented, a support group that helped other military families identify and combat predators who targeted them. They called themselves the Phoenix Network, rising from the ashes of their destroyed families to protect others. "We turned our pain into power," Anita Pearson explained during a television interview. Wesley thought military families were easy targets because we're often isolated, dealing with deployment stress and navigating complex custody situations. He was wrong. We're warriors, and when we fight together, we're unstoppable. Frederick thrived in his new environment. Living with his father full-time, He'd grown confident and strong, channeling his anger into productive outlets like martial arts and academic achievement. The scared, abused boy was becoming a formidable young man. "I want to join the military like you, Dad," Frederick said one evening as they worked on his homework together. "Why?" Brent asked, genuinely curious. "Because there are more people like Wesley out there, and someone needs to stop them. I want to be that someone." Brent felt a surge of pride. His son had survived Wesley's abuse and emerged stronger, driven by a desire to protect others rather than consumed by revenge. It was the best possible outcome of their nightmare. As for Brent himself, the successful completion of his personal mission had brought unexpected recognition. His commanding officer, Ivan Burnett, had recommended him for a Pentagon position developing new protocols for supporting military families facing domestic abuse. The Ghost of Kandahar was transitioning from hunter to protector. On the anniversary of Wesley's arrest, Brent visited the federal prison where his enemy was caged. He didn't speak to Wesley directly. That would have been against regulations, but he made sure Wesley saw him in the visitors area, talking quietly with the warden about security procedures. Wesley's eyes met his through the reinforced glass, and Brent saw complete defeat there. The predator who'd once terrorized military families was now a broken man, living every day in fear, knowing that his crimes had made him a target for every inmate who'd ever served their country. The blood debt was paid in full. That evening, Brent and Frederick grilled steaks on their apartment balcony, watching the Colorado sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. They were building something new together, not just a relationship, but a legacy of justice for military families who'd been failed by the system. "I'm proud of you, son," Brent said quietly. Frederick smiled, the first truly happy expression Brent had seen from him in years. "I'm proud of you too, Dad. You came home when I needed you most." Brent nodded, thinking of all the families they'd saved, all the predators they'd stopped, all the victories yet to come. The Ghost had found his purpose beyond warfare, protecting the innocent and punishing those who preyed on the vulnerable. Some debts could only be paid in blood. This one had been worth every drop. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.